Welcome to Cycling Demystified, brought to you by Foundation Bike Fit and Frequency Cycle Works, the podcast where we help you take your cycling to the next level by sharing the knowledge from experienced bike fitters, mechanics, and the hidden players within the bike industry.
Alright team, welcome back to the podcast, and this is the final episode in our mini-series on foot optimization, and today we're going to be talking about wedging, not wedgies, wedging. Very much keeping it in the bike fit context here. And there are three different ways that we can apply wedging to the foot pedal interface and how that affects your pedaling, your connection with the bike. And so, we'll just go through it, what it is, why you should be paying attention, when you should apply it, what kind of results you should be getting, what kind of symptoms, signs may you be addressing with it. Just before we go, we're in a slightly different location. We're up on the concourse in the Velo Park, looking down into the velodrome. There's a couple of people flying around, so you might hear some rumbles of the track.
Hopefully not crashing.
Hopefully no crashing. Yeah, it looks pretty sedate there today. And there's some pickleball happening as well. A new addition to a velodrome. Who'd have thought? Pickleball in the middle of a velodrome. Anyway.
It's a brave new world.
Anyway, wedging. Let's talk about wedging and why should we care about it? Should we start the usual? What is it? Why should we care?
Yeah, that's a good place to start. What is it? Why do we care? When do we want to use it?
Yeah.
How do we want to use it?
All right, Matthew, you want to kick us off? What is a wedge?
So I guess, like you mentioned or alluded to, there are a few different ways that you can wedge or apply wedges to the foot shoe interface. And I guess the overall kind of, in a summary, or to kind of set the scene, a wedge is effectively an intervention to, I think the best way to put it would be to increase the overall contact and surface area of the foot inside the shoe bed or with the sole of the shoe. So usually a wedge would be maybe used to load a part of the foot which a rider might not be able to feel without, and to create as even a distribution of weight across the foot as possible and between left and right as much as possible, because very rarely do people have feet that are the same. So obviously the bike being a symmetrical environment for the most part, what we want to try and do is load each side of the body as evenly as possible, whilst appreciating that no human is completely symmetrical, and wedging can be a good way to do that in terms of loading different parts of the foot in different ways and making sure that that connection that the rider has between their foot and the sole of the shoe is as solid and as kind of as good as possible, really.
Yeah, I think the key word here is connection, and I think everything we're trying to do within our bike fit is to create a better connection between human and machine, so that we can apply our energy to that machine to make us go forward in the most efficient way possible. So there's the least amount of energy lost, or you're using your energy effectively to create force against the machine. And also comfort. So, making sure that your body is working with the bike and the bike's not working against your body. And so, as you were describing, human bodies are not symmetrical and don't operate in a completely symmetrical kind of way. However, bikes are much more symmetrical than human bodies. And so wedging is an intervention that allows us to create a better interface which feels kind of more even between bike and body. So
and there's three basic kind of outcomes of successful wedging, I would say, which are improved symmetry between left and right if done properly, improved stability through better connection between the foot, the shoe interface, and then usually with those two things come better power transfer, more efficient power transfer, or more efficient use of the force that you're applying through the system.
Yeah, and our triumvirate of different priorities of comfort, efficiency and performance, they're all related when it comes to bike fit. And we're always trying to achieve a balance between those three priorities. And if you improve one or two of those aspects, then you'll likely improve the third aspect as well. So just going back to what wedging is exactly, I mean, the clue's in the name, but essentially a wedge is a piece of angled material that will interface with your foot at a different angle than currently. So if you're looking at a shoe and bike from the front of the bike, so directly head on, wedging will, if you put a wedge, say, underneath a shoe, it will tilt that shoe either a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. So either in towards the bike or away from the bike a little bit. So yeah, I think it's important to note that wedging in particular is all about angling or applying an angle to whatever contact surface area there is on the bike. And we're talking about the connection between your foot and the shoe, and then the shoe to the pedal. So yeah, that's kind of what a wedge is. And there's different places that we can apply wedging as well. So most commonly we have cleat wedges. So these are wedges which slide in between your cleat and the shoe. So it will angle the cleat relative to the shoe surface area. So when you're clipped in, then the shoe will sit at a different angle. That's external wedging. We also have internal wedging, so wedges which are applied to the inside of the shoe. So, and these are broken down into forefoot wedges and also heel wedges. So if you think of your foot as operating in two halves, like the forefoot being the front of your foot and the heel being the back of your foot, again, your foot operates actually in a rotational kind of manner. So there is. So go ahead, Matt. You look like you're.
Well, I think that's a good place before we get into the nitty gritty of wedging, is to learn how the foot functions, both on the bike and off the bike.
Okay.
And going through like each phase of the gait cycle, and then that might give us some bit more context as to where and when to apply wedging.
I'll just finish off by saying that internal wedging applies to, again, kind of bits of material which are angled slightly more on one side than the other, which will allow you the interface inside the shoe, the insole of the shoe, to be kind of angled slightly. So you can apply the wedge just at the forefoot in front of the shoe, at the back of the shoe, or both at the same time, and with multiple different variations in between, or numbers of wedges and so on. The same with the cleat wedges as well. All right, so that's kind of what a wedge is. So physically, kind of what we're trying to do with a wedge. Should we talk about gait and feet and what a foot does?
I think that'll set the scene quite well. So if you think about like cycling, we always say is quite an unnatural thing for your body to do, and this is no different when talking about feet. So cycling is actually pretty bad for your feet. But if you think about walking or running and your natural kind of gait cycle as you go, through daily life and forward motion, usually when you're walking, you will contact the ground initially with the lateral aspect or outside of your heel. That's where most people will contact the ground. As you kind of roll through from the initial contact phase into what we call the stance phase of gait, or kind of where your foot is in kind of like the mid part of the gait cycle, where you are kind of like loading the foot, this is where pronation occurs. And pronation is a necessary aspect and a necessary function of your foot going through the gait cycle when you walk and run. So by this point, you are loading your foot, and your medial arch, so the arch on the inside of your foot, is being elongated and flattened and effectively loading a coil that is all of the muscles, the tendons, the fascia underneath your foot in order to get energy return as you go into the latter phase of the gait or the toe off phase of the gait to propel you forward into your next stride.
Yeah.
Now, obviously in cycling, this doesn't happen, and your foot is essentially in the stance phase, in mid-stance, all the time.
This is where, like, you have, if you imagine contact with the floor, you have contact through your heel, and pretty much the most of your foot is in contact with the floor.
Yeah, so this kind of tripod stance and contact through the heel, first met head and fifth met head.
Yeah, so met head being metatarsal head, which is basically where the ball of your foot is, that kind of big knuckle that sits underneath your big toe, and then fifth metatarsal joint, which is the joint underneath your little toe. So you've got to imagine that in an ideal sense, your foot is a tripod, with the heel being the furthest point at the back, the point under your big toe, under your first metatarsal joint under your big toe as your kind of other point of the triangle, and then your fifth met head as the third point of the triangle. So you want kind of good distribution of weight through those 3 points.
So in this phase of gait, where you have essentially loaded the coil of the spring through the arch, nothing underneath your foot basically works. And you are essentially waiting for that energy return to happen as you go off and pivot off your big toe to get that energy back to go into your next phase of gait.
Yeah.
So cycling, your foot is essentially a slab of meat at the bottom of your leg that doesn't do anything and is locked in to a very stiff shoe. So
I'd like to say passive.
That's another way of putting it. Probably a better way of putting it than I've just described, but the point still stands. So when we're in this passive phase of gait, this is where we are when we're in our cycling shoe. We're basically just pushing on a slab of meat that's stuck at the end of our leg and that doesn't give us anything back. This is where stiff cycling shoes come into play, insoles come into play, and wedging can come into play as well, to increase the proprioception and the amount of contact you have through your foot as you push on the pedal.
Okay, so if we just go back to that kind of gait cycle, so we kind of land on our heel to initiate the gait cycle, but it's not in the middle of our heel. We tend to land on
the lateral aspect,
aspect,
the outside.
So if you look at your trainers, take off your shoes, have a look at where the wear patterns are on the underside of your shoe, you might find that the outside of the shoe might be wearing more than just right in the middle.
You will also likely find that the geometry of the shoe has what's called a lateral heel bevel, which is a piece of the heel, or the lateral aspect of your heel, that is cut away or angled slightly in order to roll you through that initial contact and get you into that kind of mid-stance phase of gait. So if you look at a running shoe, then lateral heel bevels are a big thing, and they're designed to kind of like help you roll through that gait cycle via the geometry of the shoe.
So if we start by contacting the heel, but on the outside edge of the heel, but we both roll onto our arch and a forward and back kind of aspect, but also we're rolling or rotating the foot onto the arch. So that kind of movement inwards we call pronation, until we make contact with the big toe knuckle, the first metatarsal head, that kind of big knuckle underneath your big toe. So when we begin the toe off or push off phase, where we're applying force against the floor to push our body or foot away from the floor to create power to move us forward, then that actually starts on the inside of the foot. So we've moved from back to front, but also from outside to inside. And this is the rotary kind of motion that our foot goes through, and that is normal. That is kind of what we want. This is how your foot is designed. And so it's really important to have that concept within your head that our bodies aren't just moving forward and back, but constantly rotating in lots of different planes at the same time. All right, so how does that apply to how we push on the pedals and why we would start to use some wedges, things like that?
So once we understand how our foot moves through our gait cycle, we can then start to maybe see patterns of how we might be loading the foot inside the shoe as we press on the pedal.
Yeah.
So if I take myself as an example, just as like a case study, no 2 feet are the same, even on the same body, but no 2 feet are the same in terms of, you know, length, arch, height, stiffness, all this kind of stuff. So I have very high medial and stiff medial arches in my feet.
So feet are
quite high up. So I have trouble pronating
Yeah.
through as I load my foot going through the gait cycle in that mid-stance phase. So my arches don't flatten and get longer, really. So I have trouble with that aspect of gait. So if I take my sort of feet as an example, my right foot is in a more supinated position than my left foot. So that essentially means a pronated position would be inwardly rotated. A supinated position would be that you load the lateral side of your foot, the outside of your foot more, and I find it difficult to load my first metatarsal head to get that pivot if I was going into the next phase of my gait cycle.
Yeah.
So this can be interesting information to decide how we might want to use wedges as an intervention to better get contact through the whole of the foot if we understand how the foot moves naturally away from the bike and outside of the of the confines of a cycling shoe. Now the opposite can happen as well. If you have a lot of kind of pronation and kind of inward movement of your foot as you go through that loading phase, you might lose the lateral aspect of your foot, the outside. And again, losing kind of like either the inside or the outside of your foot can be detrimental to your stability inside the shoe and generating force and applying that force through that shoe and that pedal.
Yeah.
So knowing how your foot moves and kind of what it naturally wants to do can have a kind of give a good starting point as to where you might want to explore wedging.
Yeah. So if we think about our tripod again, our foot being a tripod, if we say lean over more to one side of that tripod, like you were saying, your foot, or the right foot, tends to be a little bit more supinated, a bit more kind of leaning to the outside of the foot. If you look from the front of the foot, then it would be a little bit more angled towards the outside. Then, yeah, the tripod is quite a good way of thinking about stability. So if you're just leaning onto 2 points of the tripod, then you're less stable than if you've got good contact through all 3 points of that kind of tripod.
Exactly.
And do you have any tips for people on how they could go about figuring out how their feet kind of sit, how they kind of move?
Yeah, so it's a great excuse to put the kettle on.
Yeah.
So basically I would just stand in bare feet, and while you're waiting for the kettle to boil or you're cleaning your teeth, just have a think about how you're kind of contacting the floor. Do you feel more weight on one side of your foot than another? Do you feel more weight on one foot than another? So left or right? Do you feel a bigger contact through the kind of the big toe, or do you feel a more contact through the little toe? Can you feel all 3 parts of the tripod? Just like getting to kind of know how your body is balanced through your feet can give you a real good indication about how you might load it when you're putting force through it on a bike.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing. So make sure you take off your shoes and your socks so you're standing barefoot on a nice solid flat floor that's even.
Yeah.
And just have a think. Sometimes I like to close my eyes so that I'm just focusing in on my feet and just kind of work through the feet systematically. Think about, am I loading more through my heels or through the front of my feet? Just go through that first. Then, am I loading more to the left or to the right? And it may be different for each foot. And then, am I loading, more on the front left or the back right or the, whatever combination it is, and just kind of go through it and kind of make a note of it. You can also, if for some reason you've got 2 bathroom scales which are the same, you can stand on 2 bathroom scales, close your eyes, stand there for a little bit, then look down and see if there is a weight distribution difference as well. So some people will literally be kind of standing more on one side of their body, and that again can give you a clue as to whether or not what you're feeling is actually kind of what's occurring in your body. So
another way to do it as well, if you've got a full-length mirror, you can stand in front of the full-length mirror and take a photo and just observe any visual differences in your feet as well. So do you have one foot arch that's higher than another? You can measure your feet. Do you have one foot that's longer than another, that's wider than another? And this can give you all some quite good clues as to how your feet might be functioning.
Yeah, and even in just getting your feet, putting them on a piece of paper, drawing around it will give you an idea of like length differences, width differences. You can even, if you wet your foot, and then put your foot down onto a bit of concrete or something like that, you can get a little impression of your feet and the arch height and so on. It will be different from one to the other. Quickly take a photo of that and just see if you can spot any differences. So lots of different ways that you can start to observe the differences between your foot, and each foot will be different because we are definitely asymmetric creatures. Like my foot, for example, I'm the opposite to you, so my right foot is slightly more pronated, so the arch is a little bit lower on the right side. I press in through my right big toe a little bit more, and I have trouble kind of loading the outside aspect of my right
Which is
foot.
interesting because we're both right-handers.
Yeah, absolutely. But we just, function in different ways. But yeah, everyone's unique. So handedness and footedness doesn't always correlate with kind of how you're functioning through different parts of your body. So understanding yourself is a really good start. The other test that a lot of bike fitters will use is the hanging test. You know that one? Where you sit on the side of a table, let your feet dangle in a sitting position. So if you're elevated off on a table surface and you let your feet dangle off the side of a table, and just get someone else to observe kind of how your feet hang. And you'll notice on everyone that your feet won't hang perfectly straight. Like pretty much always the kind of outside of your feet will be slightly lower than the inside of your feet, and that's just the natural pattern. So again, if you think about how you go through your gait cycle, start walking, running, you always contact the outside of your foot first and roll inwards towards the big toe and then spring off the big toe. So that is kind of how our feet are. We're not flat-footed naturally. All right, so we've talked
knowing that, where do we go next?
So if we again think about the task at hand is to create the best connection between your shoe and your foot during the pedal cycle, and we know that your foot generally stays in a relatively passive state where we get good contact through, or the ideal is to try and get good contact through the forefoot and the heel at the same time, and even distribution of pressure across the feet in an ideal sense within the shoe. I have to say that when we do press down on the pedals, although our foot we've described as being in a passive kind of state, it isn't actually passive. It's just more passive than it would be going through the gait cycle. So your foot is still working, but it's just restricted in the range of motion that it can apply, and restricted, way more restricted than it was designed to do. And so we lose a lot of what we call proprioception, or a sense of kind of what's happening through our feet, because our feet just aren't as active. They're just not working as well. There still are micro movements through our feet, because that's kind of what our feet want to do. As we press into our feet, they will compress a little bit. They will try and find that similar movement pattern that they're trying to, that they've been designed to do, but they're just on a much smaller scale. But depending on how your foot is functioning, and also the shape and design of your foot and what it's been exposed to and so on, as your foot presses down on the pedals inside the shoe, it will most likely not press down in a completely even and balanced manner across the whole of the shoe. So if we're talking about your foot, Matt, if you're more likely to be pressing down on the outside of your foot through your walking gait, then you're probably going to do something similar when you're pedaling. So that's kind of what your foot is designed to do, is kind of wants to mimic a bit of gait. And so you might find that you press down harder on the outside of your foot, inside your cycling shoe, and if you do that repeatedly, we do 10,000 pedal strokes an hour. If we keep doing that, then you might find that you get a bit of pressure on the outside of your foot because you're just pressing down more through that kind of outside of your foot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly that.
And you're just making more contact through the outside of your foot.
Yeah. No, totally.
Yeah. So, wedging, what we try and do with wedges is to build up the inside, or where you're not feeling the contact with the base of the shoe. We try and put that wedge in so that you get just as much contact underneath the medial side of your foot, the inside edge of your foot, underneath that kind of big toe joint, as you would do on the outside edge. And therefore, your foot can start to spread the load more evenly. You can actually find some contact area with the inside of your shoe, so we can start to spread that load out. And
I think that's a very important distinction, is that what we're trying to do with wedging is take up space inside the shoe to effectively bring the quote-unquote floor up to your foot to increase proprioception. We're not using the wedge as a crutch to tip the foot in a direction that we want it to go. In very rare occasions are we doing that.
Yeah, I think historically there has been a slight misunderstanding of kind of how wedging works and what it can do. And I think the old school way of thinking was that, if, I don't know, there's certainly an obsession with like kind of knee tracking and alignment of the knee through the pedal stroke, historically through bike fitting. And if we saw like kind of knees kind of rolling outwards during the pedal stroke, then maybe we would try and tip the knee inwards by kind of putting a wedge that would kind of angle the foot or knee inward. Through quite a bit of experimenting and trying stuff out on people, I definitely know that generally doesn't work that way. And it's actually the opposite, where we're trying to create a more stable or balanced surface for the foot to kind of contact through the shoe, which actually gets the results.
So we're encouraging the foot to move in the way that we maybe want it to through proprioception rather than
forcing it.
Exactly. And I think it's worth mentioning at this point that wedging usually comes after we've experimented or added arch support.
Yes.
So this is not a substitute or a precursor to arch support. This is after we've got some proprioceptive kind of feeling through the arch.
Yeah. So just as a quick aside, again, a lot of arch support. Again, if you listen to our previous conversations with Tony Cork about insoles and arch support, he berates us for using the word arch support because it gives the wrong impression of what we're actually trying to do. So the arch support is really there to give the arch more information. It's like arch toucher, as Tony likes to say, to basically, because our foot's more passive, we want to try and give it as much information as possible about where the ground is, and if we make contact with the arch, then the foot has much better understanding of where it is in space. And so sometimes your foot just needs that kind of proprioception to get into a better position, to find the tripod itself. Otherwise, if there's a big gap underneath your arch within your cycling shoe and you're pushing down into it and your foot's trying to move into the space, then it can get confused as to where it should be.
Yeah, exactly, So quote-unquote arch support is increased proprioception rather than a crutch.
But we can get onto that on another
That's a story for another day.
So, but once you've got your arch support, or you've played around with the arch support, and you know that your feet are kind of getting good connection, good proprioception, but you're still feeling that there's something a little bit off, and you're not feeling good connection through one side of your foot or front to back, then you can start playing with wedging. Generally, we like to start with internal wedging or in-shoe wedging initially, because it's quick and easy to do. you'll find that the wedges, literally, you can just slide them in underneath your arch support or insole, and off you go, test it out. Whereas cleat wedges, they do the same thing, but you have to undo your cleats and put them back on again. And so even if you just start with insole, in-shoe wedging, it's a good place for a diagnostic, even if they take up a bit too much space inside your shoe.
Well, the other interesting thing about starting with internal or inside shoe support is, obviously, if you put a wedge underneath the cleat, you're automatically starting at the forefoot.
Yeah.
Is that necessarily a good thing? Is it necessarily a bad thing?
Well, the cleat wedge theoretically should tilt like the whole shoe all at once. But sometimes, you want to try and figure out if you want to wedge the forefoot or the heel or both.
Yeah.
So starting with the in-shoe kind of wedges is probably a better way to...
Yeah, so it's more localised, so you can decide how much intervention you want at each aspect of either the heel or the forefoot, rather than tipping the entire shoe straight off. Because what we want is usually minimal dose with this stuff. Yeah. So if you're tipping the whole shoe as your initial kind of trial or test, then you've kind of gone from 0 to 100 and not gone through a robust enough process of deciding A, and 1, where the intervention needs to come, and B, and 2, how much.
Yeah. All right, so should we get on to kind of how we go about using wedges, how we go about testing, do that. So I guess we've decided we're going to start with forefoot wedges or in-shoe wedges. Well, you could start forefoot or heel.
I tend to start with heel.
Do you? Oh,
yeah,
nice.
I tend to start with the heel. Don't know why, but I think it's less invasive at the heel. So some people's foot mechanics, you put a forefoot wedge in and it's very invasive straight away if they're not used to it.
Yeah.
Whereas the heel tends to be a little less aggressive to start with. So I tend to start with heel wedging.
Yeah.
And effectively, what I'm looking for is the rider's feedback on contact to the shoe. So is their heel in contact with the shoe? Can they feel, have they got any proprioception of their heel in contact with the back of the shoe? Can I see anything visually? Looking at how that kind of rider is pedaling with or without the intervention. And the other thing is it's super easy to take out.
Yeah.
So what we tend to do is build it up, maybe 2, 3, even 4 heel wedges until the rider can start to get some better proprioception and some contact through that heel. And then you can start to remove it really quickly, just to get that reference point of, okay, where is too far, how much is necessary, and where's the point where the rider can't feel a difference. And it's this very kind of like quick fire testing that gives you that immediate feedback. But if you can minimize the time between tests and kind of making those interventions, then you're going to have a better chance at getting positive feedback. And by positive feedback, we mean not like this is better, but I can feel a difference, positive or negative. Yeah.
So the process is just the same as testing all the other aspects of your bike fit. You want to test systematically in small increments. Keep testing until, keep adding wedges in this case, until it feels worse. And then remove the wedges until you get to a point where it gets better.
Yeah, and the ultimate kind of positive is that there's a difference in feeling for the rider, a positive difference, and there's a positive visual difference in how they're moving on the bike. And if you get those two things, you're probably in a good spot.
Yeah. And then moving on to forefoot wedges, then the process is the same again.
Same process. Usually, I'm talking kind of anecdotally, I don't have data or evidence to kind of back this up, but usually forefoot wedging works better, I find, on higher arched individuals or more supinated individuals, because it's a bit more of a kind of aggressive intervention. You kind of, if you have a more of a flat or pronated foot, then because of the actual kind of invasive nature of a 4-foot wedge, it can be too much sometimes.
Yeah.
So I tend to find 4-foot wedges work better on higher arched or more supinated feet, just because there's usually more space between the first met head and the shoe, and the 4-foot wedge can kind of take that up a little better. So for example, I've got all sorts of stuff in my shoes, but on my right foot I have both heel wedges and a 4-foot wedge, just because I do have a ton of space between the medial aspect of my foot, but both the heel and the 4-foot and the shoe. So I would say, depending on your kind of foot shape and kind of what you're feeling inside the shoe, start with heel wedging because it's slightly less aggressive, and then move on to 4-foot wedging if the heels maybe aren't making quite as much of a difference as, or if there's not quite so much change as that you maybe kind of want to feel. And then you can always use that 4-foot wedge to get a real sense of what this might feel like. If it works, great, fantastic. If it's too much, then you can always go back and retrace your steps.
And the idea is to find an ideal combination where your foot just feels super solid, like you're getting a really good contact through the 3 bases of support of your triangle, your tripod, and your foot feels pretty relaxed. If you get good support through your tripod, then your foot will feel more relaxed, which is kind of strange sometimes. People don't realize that their foot's been super active and gripping and toes have been clawing, because your foot is essentially trying to find that base of support, but it can't do it through its shape, and so it has to be active to try and get that support. So you just got to find the right combination. And if in-shoe wedging is taking up too much room inside the shoe, that's where you can use cleat wedges to achieve a similar kind of result, but without taking up that room inside the shoe.
Yeah, I think like cleat wedges are probably like would be the thing I would go to last, just because you want that snug but not constrictive feeling inside the shoe, and sometimes that can, we sometimes use wedging just to take up volume. You know, if a shoe is slightly too voluminous, then like maybe sometimes a shim is better. But these wedges can help with that as well. So you can stack wedges back to front on top of each other to create a shim. That works well too. So there's lots of different ways you can play around with them, but the overall goal is that solid connection through the shoe with the foot. Yeah,
absolutely. And just a couple of points to note. One is on the angle of wedges. Now, 99% of the time we will be using what we term as a varus wedge, which is just a fancy term of saying that the highest point of the wedge should usually be on the inside edge of your shoe. So if we think back to what we were saying about sitting on the side of a table and letting your feet hang, you'll notice that most, like 99.9% people will have their feet hanging with the outside edge of their feet lower than the inside edge of the feet. That is just your natural kind of like foot angle. And so most people will require that angle of wedge to be higher on the inside of their shoe than the outside of the shoe. So if you're playing around and you go the opposite way, it's going to be a very rare case scenario. So just something to bear in mind. If you get confused, then seek out some help from your local bike fitter and so on. Because if you go a little bit too much or go the wrong way, and certainly document what you do, then it can kind of cause some discomfort through the knees and so on. So you do need to be diligent in paying attention to how your body is responding and so on. The second point is that different shoes will have different shapes, and so may affect the level of wedging and location of wedging that is required. And so this is tricky when you have different shoes and you want to replicate your fit across it. And just for example, like specialized shoes already have internal varus wedging built into them. It's not something they tell anyone, but it is something that is built into them. And for whatever reason, at Specialized we have to thank for kind of leading the way in with Andy Pruitt leading the way in developing a lot of these wedges and systems and so on. But for some reason, they decided that all their shoes should have some internal wedging built in already. So, if you're finding it difficult to get along with like specialized shoes and you're feeling a lot of pressure on the inside edge of your foot, particularly around your big toe knuckle or the arch or inside edge of your heel, it may actually be because there's too much wedging already inbuilt into the shoe. And you go to a different shoe and you've bought another pair of shoes, a pair of Lakes, for example, which are generally very neutral. You might suddenly find that you actually need some more wedging in that. So different shoes will have different effects. So that's really important to build in, be aware of. So don't expect the process to be exactly the same across different shoes.
Definitely.
Which is really annoying.
It is, but first stage is knowledge, right? So,
Yeah.
And I would add a third thing to that as well,
Yeah.
in that wedging is not a substitute for lacking in foot function.
Yes.
We should all be working on our overall foot function and trying to strengthen and just generally work on, how's best to put this? Basically making your feet a functioning and contributing part of your body rather than just something that you stand on.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I was trying to think of a diplomatic way to put that.
Well,
But-
there's always stuff to work on, right? So,
Yeah.
like, I'm the opposite of you, so my right foot tends to pronate a lot more because I tend to favor that side. And so I know that my arch is a little bit low on the right-hand side. I tend to load the big toe a little bit more, so I lose that kind of connection with the outside edge of my foot. So I know that I need to work on creating more arch strength and proprioception on that kind of right-hand side so that I can maintain a better connection through the whole of my foot. And consequently, that's the reason for that, is because I don't load my left foot as much. And so, like, working on our bodies is a continual discipline. It's never really completed. And that might not sound that attractive, but it's just like the rest of your health. You brush your teeth every day. Like, if I didn't have to brush my teeth, that would be great. But I do, because I want to maintain the health of my teeth so that I can eat delicious things. And the same applies for the rest of your body. You want to be a high-functioning bike rider. So, look after your body. Find those little things that you could be doing every single day that could be helping your health, your function, your ability to function well on the bike. And your body is the ultimate engine. So
We should put a link in the show notes for this to Gary Ward's Wake Up Your Feet course.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, super brilliant course. I think it's, at this point in time, probably like 25 quid.
25, 30 quid.
Yeah.
You get access to it for life.
Yeah.
You should buy the wedges that go with it.
Yeah.
They're another 20 odd quid.
Yeah.
So for less than 50 quid, you've got access to this incredible information about how your feet work, and it empowers you to take charge of your own foot function and how that affects the rest of your body. I did the course over Christmas,
Yeah.
and it was like literally like switching a light bulb on.
Yeah.
It's so good, and everyone should do it.
Yeah.
And we are in no way affiliated with Gary Ward whatsoever.
Yeah. It's not cycling specific. It's just about like kind of how your foot functions in life.
Yeah. And understanding your relationship with the ground. And in bike riding terms, your ground is your foot inside the shoe, on the pedal. That is your ground.
And just a final thought on feet themselves. You may be looking at your feet and thinking, well, am I flat-footed? Have I got a high arch? Have I got this? Have I got that? Am I this? Am I that? And it's really important to try not to hold on to labels too much. Like, a lot of people we see do have very flat feet, and they've been told they've got flat feet in a kind of negative kind of fashion. And yeah, they are an indicator. Like, flat feet may be an indicator that at some point your feet have gone through some kind of experience that it's found that that is the best way that it has to function. But it's really important to remember that everything in your body is malleable. Just because someone has labeled your foot as flat feet or flat foot it doesn't mean that you are flat-footed for life.
Yeah. It's an observation, not a condition.
Yeah. And so you need to observe whether or not is that flat-footedness, is that helping me right now? Is it helping me be a better bike rider? Is it helping me to be a strong, stable performance machine? Is it giving me comfort through the miles that I'm going through? If not, then yeah, do something about it. And something like the Gary Ward course is one way that you can improve your foot function. Wedges, insoles, and all the other interventions we talked about will kind of help create the right environment for your foot to function well on the bike. But you have to complement this by improving your form and your function. And if your foot changes, again, like the wedging and the support can change over time as well. So this is why we're a big fan of modular designs, things that can change, and empowering people to think about their own bodies and their functions so that they can start playing around with these little kind of gizmos and wedges and bits and bobs and so on.
Likewise, it's not just flat feet. High arches come with their inherent problems too.
Yeah.
So I'm forever trying to flatten my arches out and get some pronation through that arch so I can load my first met head better. Yeah. So, it's, again, like you were saying, it's not just about the label. It's an observation, not a condition. And if you work hard enough, most things about the body can be improved.
Yeah, and it gives you better function all around. So you work on your feet, you'll be a better runner as well as a cyclist.
Yeah, better balance.
Yeah,
just in general.
Things like that. So yeah, cool. Whew, that was quite a lot.
That was quite a lot.
Yeah, but hopefully, again, that's been useful.
Where can we get some wedges if we were interested in experimenting with this stuff?
Yeah, well, the best place to go is probably formbikefitting.com. Ronan makes all the little gizmos and wonderful little bits that you need. If you've got any questions, you can always email him. If you're near us in London, then come by the studio, drop us a note. We've got all the little wedges, shims, insoles, all the things that you need, and always happy to talk about what specific things that you need to make your bike riding even better. I think that should be it.
Knock it on the head there,
yeah. I mean, there's so much more we can talk about, but yeah, if you've got any questions, find us, as always, info@foundation.fit. Find us on Instagram at FD_bikefit. And if you found this little mini-series useful, pass it on, tell your friends, leave us a review on whichever channel you listen to us on. Always helps to spread the word. And yeah, hope you ride well. All right, over and out.
Suffering from numb hands, tingling toes, and any other persistent discomforts when you ride? These are all signs that your bike fit could be improved. If you're bike fit curious, get in touch with Way or Matt by emailing info@foundation.fit or finding them on Instagram @FDN_bikefit. Finally, for all your bike servicing needs, custom dream bike or hand-built wheels, go to www.frequencycycleworks.com or find me on Instagram @frequencycycleworks. Until next time, keep on spinning.
Wait.